So the Gonzaga Climate Institute exists in order to help our region, the American Inland Northwest, to understand and respond to the climate crisis. Amidst all of the turmoil and uncertainty created by the new federal administration, a colleague here at Gonzaga recently asked of the Climate Institute's work, but is this really why Gonzaga exists? The point the person was trying to make, I think, is that from their perspective, we're an institution of higher education that exists to educate college and graduate students, not to educate K-12 students about climate change, and not to help partners install solar arrays and battery backup microgrids in community buildings. Though, of course, it's worthy to help low-income families get new electric heat pumps and air quality monitors, it's not, they were thinking, central to why we exist. While understandable, I couldn't disagree with this sentiment more. Sure, it's true that Gonzaga is an exemplary learning community whose chief goal is to educate people. However, as a Jesuit, Catholic, humanistic institution, our mission demands much more. We are not an education factory, churning out diplomaed graduates who can more effectively find and secure material wealth. No, Gonzaga University exists to advance a positive, hope-filled vision of a just and verdant world. At a time when our country is doubting the value of universities, when some people see universities as cloistered places for the rich to educate their children, to maintain their social status, when some people see universities as elitist institutions disconnected from regular people struggling to pay the rent and feed their families, academic initiatives like the Gonzaga Institute for Climate, Water, and the Environment is absolutely central to Gonzaga University's mission. This is what it means to be an institution that aims to graduate students who pursue the common good, who walk with the poor, and who care for our common home. 8 years ago this month, I had the honor of delivering a talk very much like this one to a group of graduating seniors. And given recent events in our nation, it seemed like the right time to return to those comments. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the many students in high school and college who are graduating and joining the real world at this perilous time. I was recently at a conference, and the speaker reminded the audience of the famous foreword to Neil Postman's book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Forgive me, if you would, for quoting from that foreword at length, as it seems especially timely at this moment. Neil Postman writes, "But we had forgotten that alongside Orwell's dark vision, there was another, slightly older, slightly less well-known, equally chilling one, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Contrary to common belief, even among the educated, Huxley and Orwell did not prophesy the same thing. Orwell warns that we will be overcome by an externally imposed oppression. But in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared that we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture. In 1984, people are controlled by inflicting pain, and in A Brave New World, they're controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us. So that's Postman's foreword, and his thesis is that Huxley, not Orwell, was ultimately right. And he goes on to try and make that point. Alas, we seem now to be living at a time when both Huxley and Orwell seem to be making a lot of really valid points. And your Jesuit education, I think, has equipped you to address both of these nightmares. In the opening decades of this new millennium, long-simmering conflicts have exploded into a roiling boil of fear, hostility, and violence. Whether we're talking about the ascent of religious fundamentalism, the mainstreaming of racism and sexism, or the ugly return of white nationalism, there's a move away from tolerance and appreciation of diversity toward the ever more strident formulations of absolutist positions. Dogmatism in its various forms seems to be on the rise as the rhetoric and reality of compromise and consensus building is replaced with vitriol and the threat of violence. These trends take on added urgency when we consider the ecological crises that threaten not only human civilization, but all forms of life on the planet. Unhealthy air and water, species extinction, stronger and larger storms, prolonged droughts, the spread of deserts, deforestation, the melting of ice caps and glaciers, rising seas, and the submersion of low-lying lands. This generation of graduates is inheriting no shortage of challenges created by their parents and grandparents. Given the state of the world, it's infuriating that earlier generations sometimes have the audacity to criticize Gen Z, such as yourselves. After all, it's not your selfishness, short-sightedness, and greed that has brought us to this moment of social and ecological crisis, but it will be your generation that will be left with the task of pulling us back from the abyss. So in the short time I have, I'd like to just make two main points. The first is directly to the graduating seniors here at Gonzaga and the 28 other Jesuit universities across the country, as well as the dozens of other Jesuit high schools here in the United States and around the world. The first point concerns the likely impact of your education and how you will be as a citizen, a parishioner, a neighbor, an employee, and a family member. As Jesuit-educated individuals who have been encouraged to be people with and for others, you are among the small group of people on the planet who are likely to recognize the true nature of the crises before us. And you are among the few people who will hopefully be driven to address them. At Gonzaga, you've been offered a liberal arts education that has, if you've taken it seriously, changed how you think and hopefully how you will act. You will find in the coming months that your peers from other institutions sometimes took more specialized technical classes. And in the short term, this might even give them a slight advantage when first joining the job market. However, I submit to you that given a world fraught with such conflict, tension, and peril, what is needed is not merely technically proficient individuals who will keep the hamster wheels of profitable consumption and waste turning. Only gradually, over the coming years, you'll realize that your Jesuit education has formed you to think and act differently from many of your peers. Your courses in philosophy and art, music, religious studies, political science, psychology, history, English, sociology, and more will make you more comfortable with ambiguity and more appreciative of the complexity of issues. You'll be more likely to see and make important distinctions. You'll have a greater appreciation for cultural diversity and a lower tolerance for conditioned ethical blindness. You'll be more likely to see and care about the ethical implications of your decisions and those for whom you work. I suspect that in the next few years, you'll find yourself in a situation, whether it be in your neighborhood or your place of worship or where you work, and someone will make a proposal that seems deeply flawed, maybe even morally problematic. You'll look around, expecting others to see the problem and speak up, but more likely than not, you'll find that often no one does. Too often, you may be the only person who sees the problem, much less cares enough to do something about it. As the Yale historian Timothy Snyder notes in his book on tyranny, the first lesson to learn from tyrants of the 20th century is to avoid what he calls anticipatory obedience. Do not obey in advance, he writes. Quote, most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want and then offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts in this way is teaching power what it can do, end quote. So remember that it may very well be the case that in many situations no one will care about climate change and the environment, about those with diverse gender identities, about immigrants, about cultural diversity, unless you do. Now, there are many forms that this can take, including writing letters, marching in the streets, running for office, but also in quiet places, working face-to-face across divisions to make your own part of the world a bit better. You here in this room and across the world truly are the people that the world needs, though I admit that you may very well find that often the world doesn't quite know what to do with you. At times, this will be a heavy burden to bear, but I really do believe that your education has given you some of the intellectual, spiritual, and emotional resources with which to carry it. I'm reminded of a colorful passage from the Trappist monk Thomas Merton. He once wrote, quote, "If I had a message to my contemporaries, it is surely this: be anything you like, be madmen, drunks, and bastards of every shape and form, but at all costs avoid one thing: success. What I'm saying is this: the score is not what matters. Life does not have to be regarded as a game in which scores are kept and somebody wins. If you are too intent on winning, you will never enjoy playing. If you have learned only to be a success, your life has probably been wasted. If a university concentrates on producing successful people, it is lamentably failing its obligation to society and to the students themselves," end quote. Now, this has got to seem like strange advice to be giving students who will be graduating, but in the context of my comments, I'm hoping this makes some sense, because after all, legions of poor around the world suffer unimaginable hardships at the hands of successful people. The climate changes and the seas rise because of the business models of successful people. The frayed threads of our world are unraveling at the hands of successful people. We need desperately to redefine what counts as success. Once commenting on Merton's claim that I just read, the political scientist David Orr said this: "The plain fact is that the planet does not need more successful people, but it does desperately need more peacemakers, healers, restorers, storytellers, and lovers of every kind. It needs people who live well in their places. It needs people of moral courage, willing to join the fight to make the world habitable and humane. And these qualities have little to do with success as we have traditionally defined it," end quote. And this brings me to my second point. When picking a major, many of you were given the seemingly sage advice not to be too idealistic. Be realistic, you were told. And maybe you took that advice, or maybe you were an environmental studies major. Now, at the end of college, deciding whether to apply for that job or join the Peace Corps, whether to go to grad school or do JVC, perhaps you're hearing that same sage advice. Don't be too idealistic. Stay the course. Be realistic. Many, in my experience, claim that the problem with ideals is they just aren't achievable. Thus, the Council for Realistic, Achievable Goals. However understandable, I submit that this view is in fact mistaken. I contend that the only hope we have of addressing the social and ecological crises before us is if we realize that, properly understood, idealism and realism imply each other. To better understand this, consider two dramatic examples taken from the 20th century. Adolf Hitler held up the creation of a perfect, in quotes, Aryan race of blue-eyed, blonde-haired people as an ideal. To characterize Hitler's program as too idealistic, that he could never fully achieve his aim, that he should have been more realistic, seems fundamentally to misunderstand the moral situation. The problem is not that Hitler's Aryan ideal is not fully achievable, and the resurgence of violent white nationalism in this country isn't problematic because its goals will never be fully achieved. No, the problem is not that these ideals are not fully attainable. The problem, of course, is that these ideals are fundamentally racist, hateful, and violent. In contrast, in his powerful 1963 speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Martin Luther King Jr. came to collect on the promissory note drafted in our Declaration of Independence. He passionately described his vision for a world in which people of all races and creeds live together in mutual respect and harmony. King's dream is clearly and explicitly idealistic, and as an ideal, it is not fully achievable. This world never has been and never will be one of perfect equality. However, does the fact that King's ideal of the beloved community, that it is not fully achievable, mean that it should not be pursued? That it is unrealistic? I would hope not. What these opposing examples are meant to reveal is that we often misunderstand the function of our ideals. Ideals aren't meaningful because they are achievable, but because they define success and failure. Ideals are useful because they define better and worse. Without moral ideals, making comparative judgments becomes arbitrary. Ideals serve as the standards, the measuring sticks by which we judge the success of our actions. In this way, ideals define what counts as realistic action. To borrow a geometric example, moral ideals are like asymptotes. Just as an asymptote can infinitely approach but never reach a limit, our actions can get closer or farther away from an ideal but never reach it. The Emancipation Proclamation, women's suffrage in the 19th Amendment, the Civil Rights Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the marriage equality ruling in Obergefell versus Hodges, each brought the United States steps closer to achieving its ideals of equality, whereas racial profiling, criminalization of reproductive freedom, criminalization and erasure of gender nonconformity, and mass incarceration and deportation each move us farther away. This also helps us to see that those who advocate being realistic are actually not, in fact, avoiding idealism at all. Rather, whether knowingly or not, defenders of realism are often simply defending the ideals of the status quo. For instance, the view that happiness can be achieved through the accumulation and consumption of material goods is idealistic. It is not fully achievable. And the view that we can have safety and prosperity in the world through the threat and use of violence and war is idealistic. My point is that one cannot simply discard or avoid moral ideals. One can choose not to explore or examine the basis of one's actions, but one's actions always occur within an understanding of the good, within a moral framework, within a prevailing ideal. Too often, the environmental movement in particular has failed to understand this point, in my judgment. Environmentalism has been very clear about what it's against. It's against air pollution, against water pollution, against species extinction and climate change. And these are good things to be against. But the inherently negative framing is problematic. For instance, one of the leading voices in the climate movement, Bill McKibben, wrote in 2016 that we are, in his words, a world at war. And that, quote, we're under attack from climate change and our only hope is to mobilize like we did in World War II. Now, to be clear, I don't disagree with McKibben that the dire state of our climate crisis, I do agree with him, and nor do I disagree about the scale of change that's needed to successfully address it. However, what I do find problematic is that by always adopting a negative framing, environmentalism is clear about what it's against, but not sufficiently clear about what it is for. What are the ideals that animate the environmental and climate movements? Understood in an asymptotic manner, I think that we can see ideals are not to be scorned. They're the indispensable driving force behind all genuine progress. Thus, I contend that the only truly realistic actions are those in service of worthwhile ideals. In the end, this is not a debate between idealism and realism, but between competing ideals. I'm reminded in this context of the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who once noted that if you're lost, you should look for the North Star. Not because you expect to arrive there, but because it gives you your orientation, your bearing. This is the function of your ideals. Your ideals are your North Star. So I say to each of you, be idealistic. Ask yourself first, what truly are my most deeply held ideals? Second, are they truly good and worth pursuing? And third, if they are indeed good and worth pursuing, ask yourself each day, what do my ideals require of me here and now? The issue then is not whether you have ideals, but whether you have the courage to declare, scrutinize, and pursue them. I'm reminded of the famous parable of the stonecutters. Long ago, a traveler was walking along a dusty path, and he came upon a person who was hard at work next to a large stone. And the traveler asked the worker, "What are you doing?" Without the slightest hesitation, the worker replied, "I'm a stonecutter, and I'm cutting stones." The traveler thanked the man and continued upon the path, coming upon a second worker, whom he asked the same question, "What are you doing?" The second worker thought for a moment, gazed briefly at the traveler, and explained, "I'm a stonecutter, and I'm cutting stones to earn money to support my family." The traveler thanked the man and continued upon the path until he came to a third worker and repeated his question again, "What are you doing?" Stopping for a moment, the third worker stared at the stone in his hand. And he slowly turned to the traveler and said, "I'm a stonecutter, and I'm building a cathedral." Each of these three workers are correct, of course, and have a legitimate perspective. The first stonecutter is indeed cutting stones, and it's noble that the second stonecutter is earning money to feed their family. But we can also approach our work like the third stonecutter and see ourselves as contributing to the great work of our time, a multi-generational effort to become an integral member of the wider community of life, to define success by the beauty that we create together. So I say to you in conclusion, you have nothing to lose, and the world has everything to gain by shaking loose of the siren song of wasteful consumption and ecocidal success. Ignore the noise from the rage industry. Instead, be realistic by dedicating yourself to ideals that are truly worthy of your life. Remember always that the future is contested. Now is the time to be a person for and with others. Thank you.